Hi, this is Carl Weinshank at the Daily Music Break. Today we have the great pleasure of speaking with Meryl Danziger. Meryl is the founder and director of Music House, and she is the author of Sing It, a biography of Pete Seeger. And I'm really looking forward to talking about Pete Seeger. And Meryl, thank you very, very much for taking time out today. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
That's my pleasure. So tell me a little bit, we're going to get into it, but tell me a little bit about Sing It, the biography of Pete Seeger.
Well, when it came out, which was 2016, it was the first biography of Pete Seeger for young readers. And hopefully I will get to tell you the whole story behind this because it was quite interesting. But it was amazing that it wasn't that the biography hadn't been written. There are many for adults, but there wasn't a single one for children. And since children were so important in terms of his mission and his legacy, that was kind of amazing. And so that was part of the impulse for writing this book.
Right.
And it just kind of it's an overview of his life that really focuses on something that could be relevant for young people, something that they can actually relate to and use, because that was what his mission was to be a link in the chain.
About what age group is this optimized for? I mean, when we say young people, it could go from 5 years old to 15. About where would you put it?
This, which is the final incarnation of this book, it went through a few phases, is really for age 9, maybe precocious 8, but 9 and up, I'm saying, because it's turned out that adults seem to really like this book too. Right. So I've stopped saying 9 to 12 and saying more like 9 to 90.
9 to 90. Okay, that's good. Now, I was thrilled to see in our back and forth that you actually met Pete Seeger. And could you tell us a little bit about that and how you came to, write a book about Pete?
Right, and if I had not met him, none of this would have happened. This had to do with the planets lining up very nicely. Mm-hmm. Well, he was part of my childhood, as he was for many of my generation, and I got to play near him on stages when I was a music teacher at the Little Red Schoolhouse. He would come and we would sing songs, but I had never actually met him personally. But I was teaching at the Lower Lab School in New York City, which is a public school. Every year I had written a play for my third graders to perform so that they could learn something about some famous musician. We had done Ella Fitzgerald, we'd done Woody Guthrie, we'd done Tchaikovsky, but we'd never done someone a living legend. Right. Anyway, I wrote a play for my classes to perform, and they got so excited about it that they started insisting that we invite Pete to the play.
Okay.
And I was very kind of not optimistic about that he could come, because it was right before his 90th birthday. He was going to be in Madison Square Garden with a full house a few weeks later. Right. Anyway, they were relentless. I sent him a letter, and I was home, I express mailed it, and I was home the next day, and my phone rang, and I heard a familiar voice on the phone say, "So what's this about a play?" And he ended up coming to the play at this school. He didn't know anybody. He'd never heard of the school. I mean, which was it was miraculous, but it was also very much in keeping with who Pete was.
Right.
And he came to the play. He liked the play, and I thought that was the end of it. And he came up to me and he said, "Well, there are a lot of mistakes, but it's a good play. If we work on this together, we could bring it around to different schools." And I said, "Oh, wonderful." He said, "Here's my phone number. Call me." And he was going to edit it. But I started thinking about it, and there was just such a disparity between the people who bowed down to Pete
Right.
and the people who had never heard of him. And I thought, a book would get out to more people. There were no books about him. It would get out to more readers. It would just be more something that we could get out into the universe. And so he agreed. I proposed the idea, and we worked for 3 years on changing, sort of transforming the play into a book for younger readers, like age 8-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And went back and forth, mailing things back and forth. He had no computer, no email. And he would edit what I'd written, and then he would edit his edits. And it seemed like an endless process. And now, at this point, he was maybe 92. And his family really didn't want him to continue doing extra things. And so our project came to an end. And then when Pete passed away a couple of years later, I just said, well, I've got to wake up this book. And I could feel him sitting next to me. I could almost feel him guiding what I was doing, saying, no, that's the wrong word. And no, that's the wrong angle. Do this instead. It was quite an amazing experience. And I rewrote it as a book for older children, partly so that I could include his experience with HUAC, where I really couldn't quite do it for the 8-year-olds.
Right.
And it just kind of, I almost felt that I was channeling it rather than writing it.
Right.
And so that's how this book happened, basically.
That's a great story. It's great when there's a personality you like. I mean, and everyone likes Pete Seeger, and then you hear a story about them, and it kind of reinforces what you like about them, as opposed to, having someone who's a celebrity or well-known person who you like, and then hearing something that's like, well, that person's a complete phony. This is.
That's a great observation, because if I discovered anything, I mean, one of the things was that he really was Pete Seeger. He walked the walk. Absolutely. I was at his house once during the writing of that first book, and he made us lunch, which was some potatoes that took about an hour and a half to cook. He had to go back and keep stirring them. There was some hummus left over from a peace rally. And there was like a salad from the garden or something. It was very Pete. It was a very Pete lunch,
It's great. It's great. Now, I want to go back to something you said at the beginning, just as a small digression. You said you taught at the Little Red Schoolhouse, and in my mind, that is, I can't quite call it up, but that's quite an important place, is it not?
Yes, it certainly was. It has a reputation. I was there for a bunch of years in the music department,
Mm-hmm.
and there were people like Mary from Peter, Paul, and Mary who went to the high school that I taught in the elementary school. It was definitely a significant how can I say? It was significant in education. It was a sister street of Bank School. It may still be. Things change, right. But it certainly had in its heyday. A lot of notable people taught there, right. Sang there.
Right. Great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Getting back to the book, and that was a digression, but that, I heard Little Red Schoolhouse, that's
right.
an important place.
Yeah.
But, I was listening to a science podcast a while ago while I was on the treadmill, and it was two youngish guys who were not scientists. It was a science podcast, and they were very funny. These guys were very funny, and one of them, they were dealing with a kind of complex theory of electromagnetism, electricity or something. And one of the guys said, sometimes when I'm really struggling with a concept, I go to a kid's website. I go to a website for kids. And if you get to a good one, obviously, it explains it and you're good to go, at least to the level that this person had to. So that, how did that kind of thought impact your writing of getting the essence of Pete Seeger across to people? How did that work for you?
I love this question. It's a great question, and I did the same thing with the theory of relativity. By the way, I just wasn't getting it, and I went to Einstein for 8-year-olds or 4-year-olds or something. I never felt as though I was writing down to kids, as in the same way that I never feel like you need to talk down to kids. But I wanted to sort of, you could say, super glue Pete to the most essential, compelling things. This was a book this is a book intended to inspire, not to give lots and lots of information. I cut it down to something where everything I said, I was, the conscience of this book is to stick to what could have meaning for children. So it wasn't a matter really of finding the bare essence as much as it was sort of the goal was to keep it glued to what could inspire them, what could motivate a child reading this book, every word if possible, to go, wow, maybe I could do something.
Right. So that leads into the next question is what is the angle that you chose and why did you choose it, Meryl?
The angle that I chose was based on a conversation I had with Pete. When I was at his house, I said to him, would you like to write a preface? And he looked a bit taken aback, but I wanted to push it a little bit. And I said, just something, a note to the reader or something. And I just want to read what he wrote because it is how the book ends. And it's also the inspiration for what I did, really, for the inspiration for the focus that I chose. Here's what he said. And he just said this, thinking, I don't know if this is really a preface. I said, that's what I want. That's it. And he wrote it down for me. I saved the little paper. If there is a world here in 100 years, it will be because millions of people get involved in trying to save it. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be rich. I've tried to do it through music. You probably don't yet know what you will do or how you will do it. It may be something right near where you live. And I still get chills every time I read that because this book was about Pete did what he did. His tool for activism was music.
Right.
He filled his toolbox with songs,
right.
And that's how he was going to repair the world. But this was kind of without preaching it at all. I do believe this book doesn't do that. It was, what is the best thing that you can find about yourself that you can do to make a contribution? And so that was the focus. It was Pete as a model, and how can you extrapolate from what he did to find your own path?
It's funny because I do interview people for this site, interviews like this, and in every case, and I was thinking about it, in every case, I was interviewing someone about a musician who achieved great musical things, be it Stevie Ray Vaughan, I talked about yesterday, we do Dave Brubeck and the Wailers coming up in the next few days. And they're all people, I'm sure, great people, but they're famous and they're known for their music. And I'm thinking about Pete Seeger. Now, Pete Seeger to me was a great musician. I mean, I love the music. That's just like one piece of it. That's one, that's one thing about him. And there's there's the activism, there's the fact that just being a mensch, basically is to sum it up. And it is really different. And that goes, Muhammad Ali, I guess, was like that. And to meet Louis Armstrong, and it's a unique gift to be able to be, you know, to have something that he's so good at and use it for the right thing, you know.
Right, that's well put. I mean, yeah, he could have been a soloist,
Right.
terrific banjo player,
Oh,
beautiful
absolutely.
singer,
Right.
but he didn't like attention. That was part of it.
Right.
You know, he just had this devotion, and he never wanted to be the center of attention. He didn't want to sing by himself. He wanted to
Right.
sing with people, not for people.
Right. And that was his whole thing of
Hmm.
getting everyone in the audience to sing. I mean, you know, that summed it up there. So it's just
Yeah.
you know, I think everyone has a warm spot in their heart for Pete Seeger. You know, him singing. I forget which song he sang, but with Tom Morello and Bruce Springsteen at Obama's first inaugural.
This land is your land.
Right. You know, and it's just, you know, that gives me chills whenever I watch it.
Yeah.
It's already must have been 90. That must have been around the time that you were.
It was it was right around that time. And it's true what you're saying. You know, I had always known that Pete was great at getting people to sing, but it didn't hit me until he came to our school, because I think I'm pretty good at getting people to sing, but there is just some magic happening when he does it. It's different. People are just, they can't not do it, you know?
Right. Right. It's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a gift.
Real gift. Yeah.
It's a gift. So Meryl, speak a little bit about, and this is the other thing I wanted to mention, is that I'm particularly interested in the UAC committee, and if you could, and I'll say why in a second, but if you could describe what that was and what Pete did. And the reason that it's so interesting to me is it you know, we have such warm and fuzzy feelings about Pete Seeger, and we should, but he showed that he was a very, 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 very brave man in that era. I read the testimony, and you know, it's no joke. I mean, he was playing with fire, and he didn't back down, and a lot of people did. You know,
Yeah.
so if you could describe that a little bit, please, Meryl.
Right. His daughter Tina, after she read what I'd written, or the way I'd written about that, which was challenging for kids, she straddled that line. She said that she was a little surprised at what I'd written, because she said he was never able to articulate it really in a way that satisfied him.
What
He
was
could have.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you could explain, some people might not be history buffs. What was UAC? What happened?
Well, it was McCarthyism. It
Right.
was the House Un-American Activities Committee that was looking for communists, for troublemakers. And Pete was considered a troublemaker, partly because he had joined the Communist Party as a very, very, very young man, later quit.
Right.
And also because of the songs he sang, because he wanted change. Anybody who was advocating for change in anything, any policies, anything about the way America was doing things, was pretty much considered a troublemaker, and they were hunted down. And so that's how he ended up being called before the committee.
Right.
And he could have pleaded the Fifth Amendment,
Right.
which would have pretty much gotten him off the hook, as I understand it. But he chose not to. And instead, he actually responded by saying, I think your questions are improper. These questions are improper. You have no right to ask me these questions. It was extremely brave of him. And he was sentenced to jail. He didn't end up having to go, but it was not easy.
Yeah, and I'm going to link, if I can find it, to the actual testimony, which isn't that long, but it shows how brave he was. And I might add that a lot of people, what McCarthy was trying to do is to get these entertainers to throw each other under the bus. And you know, Pete didn't play that game.
Yeah, I actually have some of that testimony embedded, if I could just read a little bit.
Sure.
he was interrogated. They said, where did you sing that song? When did you sing it? For whom did you sing it? And so on. This was Pete's chance to exercise his rights as an American citizen. He told the committee that their questions were improper and that he had the right to keep his opinions private. They asked him again and again, I direct you to answer the question. Each time his answer was the same. I will tell you about my songs, but I am not interested in telling you who wrote them. And I will tell you about my songs, but I am not interested in telling you who listened to them. He even offered to sing a song for them. He said, I don't know how well I can do it without my banjo. And of course, they just put that right down. That was not.
I didn't see that. But
he was still very much Pete in that extremely difficult situation. As you said, he's just stayed true to himself.
Which, the counterpoint of, again, this guy who is a warm and fuzzy Mr. Rogers kind of guy, being, I'm sure Mr. Rogers was too, just, being so brave and really walking the walk, as you said.
If I could say one comment on what you just said, I would not call Pete warm and fuzzy.
Oh, no?
His relationship to people, he related to people as a kind of a group.
Right.
But individually, he was very, very kind to me, and we talked on the phone many, many times, but I never felt that he was especially interested in me as a person. It was more that he was interested in me as somebody who could be part of the bigger picture, somebody who could make a contribution. Very palpably, that was, I think other people have said the same thing. It wasn't like, oh, let's just chat about the, things. It was always with a purpose, every single thing he did.
That's a very interesting and valuable observation, really, about him from someone who knew him. So it's a, probably not the time or place, and I don't think we have time to get into what might have been his, family relationships and everything like that. But it probably is an interesting kind of topic, because he was, as you're saying, a guy with a cause. So it's an interesting area of conversation, maybe for another day. The second to last question I'd like to ask you is to talk a little bit, please, about Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, which is another icon. I know they knew each other very early on, now Woody Guthrie was from back here, and Pete was from, I think, Oklahoma. Am I right?
Actually, Woody was from Okemo, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And Pete was from New York.
Okay, so I might use that great editing skill that I taught you. But actually, I'm not. I'm just kidding. So anyway, I was over my skis a little too much there, as they say. But if you could talk for a couple of minutes about Woody Guthrie, that would be great.
Right. Well, Pete and Woody met at on March 3rd, 1940.
My birthday.
They were attending a benefit to raise money for farm workers. It was in New York City, and Pete had heard of Woody, and of course Woody, they'd never met. And Pete, actually, there were a lot of musicians, and Pete got up to sing a song, and according to him, he totally messed it up, forgot the words, forgot the chords, and sat down, slunk off the stage, and then in came Woody Guthrie, and he said he was, the book sometimes says things better than I could, actually. Out came a wiry little man in a cowboy hat, boots, and jeans. He needed a shave. Woody sang some of his own songs, told a few homespun stories, seeming not to care one way or the other what the audience would think. The audience was mesmerized. They were so different. Woody was a wild man, He did everything. Pete was pretty straight and proper and shy. Right. And they just clicked. their chemistry just clicked. And Woody introduced Pete to not just the wider world, but just a different way of looking at things and adventure. He taught Pete how to hitchhike by, on a railroad train. You know about this? Where he actually taught him how to, because he said you should. Woody said to Pete, you should really see the world. And Pete was like, well, how do you do it if you have no money? And he said, you hop a train. And Pete was, what do you mean hop a train? and Woody taught him how to jump on a train, and then just as it was pulling out, and then jump off the train just before it arrived at the next station. Right. And the first time Pete tried it, he jumped off, broke his banjo, had to go to a pawn shop, look for another banjo. They didn't have one, and he was stuck with the guitar for a while. But he introduced him to sort of more daring things, and Pete, whatever his limitations might have been in embracing the daring life, because it wasn't really his personality, he always, I think, I got the feeling, this could just be my opinion, that he wished he had more of that. Right. And he tried to adopt that, and sometimes even in his speech, using a little slang. His English was almost too good. He was almost, I think, to some extent, rejected his very kind of formal side. Right.
Well, and we don't have time to talk about it here, but he came from quite a musical family and a great achievement. So many other things to talk about. The Elizabeth, the Elizabeth Cotton, the whole Elizabeth Cotton story. But again, we don't have time for that.
Actually, the biggest challenge in writing this book, if I had to say, was figuring out what I could possibly leave out.
Right. I hear you. And did the last question on that, and then I have the last question, is did Guthrie and Seeger remain close? I mean, was it a close relationship, or was it just like, how close was it, and did it last until Seeger?
It was a very close relationship. It lasted until Woody died. They sometimes traveled together, but when they didn't, I think the Woody aura kind of hung over Pete, and it definitely influenced him forever. Absolutely.
Okay. And the last question is, and you've kind of answered this, but it's good to get it in one place. What is Pete Seeger's legacy?
I think it was pretty well encapsulated in that little bit that he wrote for the readers, that we're all links in a chain. Mm-hmm. That he used music as his tool, that our job, our responsibility, he wanted children to feel that their responsibility was to think about that, and what can we do? How can we contribute?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Meryl, I'd like to thank you very, very much for taking time out. This is, I'm sure the book is great, and just talk about Pete Seeger is a great thing.
Does that come out backwards?
No, it's good. And I will have
available.
I'm sorry?
It's available. People describe it as a breezy read, but you still learn quite a lot about Pete. Yeah.
Okay, and I will put a link, whichever you want, I guess the Amazon, but if there's another one you want, I'll put it in the post I write with it. And,
great.
I'd like to, again, thank you very, very much for taking time out.
Well, thank you so much. It's important to get this out.
Beautiful. So this is Carl Weinshank for the Daily Music Break, and keep listening to great music. Thank you.